Hello, welcome to the All or Nothing podcast. Our official sponsors are KR Couriers and Transport Limited. This is a Northwest based courier company delivering all across the UK. They can assist in home moves and removals to large, heavy and bulky items, collections and drop-offs. Fast, safe and reliable deliveries. Please get in touch for a free quote. You'll find all the information within the description. Thank you. Hello everybody and welcome to the Billy Moore podcast, and today's special guest is DJ Mike Knowler. How are you, mate?
I'm all right, mate. I'm good. Sun shining, a bit cold, but generally I'm all right.
See, Mike, you brought dance to Merseyside, to Liverpool way back when now, isn't it?
Well, it wasn't just me. It was a combination of me, Andy Carroll and James Barton. I was a resident DJ in the State in the 80s with Andy, and we were playing 80s music, you know, like the Smiths, New Order, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Dead or Alive, U2, Simple Minds. But both of us were aware of house music, and we wanted to somehow bring house music in. And then, out of the blue, in August of 1988, James Barton said that he was going to put an acid house night on a Monday. And did we have the records? So we said, oh yeah, we've got the records. Yeah. We'd been playing the Odd House track, but it wasn't really what our crowd wanted. But this Monday night, I didn't know how it was going to go. And there was nobody there at 10:30. And suddenly at 11, the place was full. And that's when I realised, you know, this is the future. Yeah. And by November, all 3 nights were now house music. So house music, it took us, 6 weeks maybe to convert the crowd to house music. Now, obviously not everybody wanted to change. So those people that didn't want to change had to go somewhere else, like Macmillan's or the Mardi Gras. And we were exclusively acid house from November 88 to November 89. Unfortunately, the state lost its license then. Yeah. Because I don't know if you're aware of it, but the boss had realised when the place was full and he'd bring the gate down. But then the bouncers were letting people in through the side door and taking money off them. And I wasn't thinking straight. I should have said to the, you've got a problem. What the licensing police did, they just decided the place was very overcrowded and out of control. And they obviously knew there were drugs involved, but they used the fact that there were more people in than there should have been to attack the licence. Now, Bernie Start, who was the owner of the club, did employ a full-time head bouncer on a salary.
This is what, the late 80s?
What was his name? Panama Jones.
Panama Jones.
Yeah, and Panama should have spoken to those doormen and said, stop it. But he didn't. And I should have... You see, if the owner had closed-circuit television on the fire doors, he'd have seen it for himself. But I cursed myself for not saying to him, look, you've got a problem. Because I was having such a good time. They're all dancing on the tables and giving it this. And, you know, middle of November, we were gone. Yeah. 89.
See, I first with the State, probably like it was the late 80s. I had told you before, 88, it was 89, and it was like the best times of my life. You know, I remember standing outside in the queues when I was on Dale Street, and the queues were round the corner.
Well, I'd had a bit of a girlfriend in Manchester when I was at Manchester University, and she came over to go to the State. We went for a Chinese meal, met Derek Hatton. And when we got to the State, there was a notice to say that the club is now closed until further notice. Yeah. So it was, I mean, you can imagine, I was the resident DJ in the State Ballroom for 5 years, from November 84 to November 89. And to suddenly find that I was no longer a regular, DJ,
Out of work, aren't you?
Well, I was out of work, and I never got nothing off the boss.
No.
There was no, here's a couple of £100 for being a good DJ for 5 years, because the man's pathologically mean. So I think he paid me for the weekend that I didn't work, the last weekend, as like a weekend's notice, and that was it.
Yeah.
Gone.
So what was some of the experiences you had? Because it was turned into a bit of a violent kind of club at the end, didn't it?
Well, what happened was, I got there in 84. Now, while I was at university, which was 82, 83, I went to the State as a punter, but on a Thursday. So Thursday night was very trendy, a lot of arty people there, including people who were in groups like Holly Johnson and Pete Burns. Yeah. But on a Saturday in particular, it could be violent.
Very rowdy, like.
Very rowdy. And I generally, for example, as you well know, the State, the toilets are downstairs in the basement. And the last thing I was going to do on a Saturday night was go to the loo. So I go out of the fire door and into the alley, because I wouldn't feel safe. And I generally didn't leave the DJ box on a Saturday night. Now, Friday, particularly by sort of 86, the crowd were technical college, Liverpool College. Some of them were a bit underage, 16, 17, 18, but very peaceful. So, there was no trouble on a Friday, but the Saturday night crowd in the mid 80s could be a bit dangerous. But once we went acid house, then there was no problem.
Was that all the ecstasy time? Everyone
yeah,
was...
I mean, once it was...
everyone was hugging each other and loving each other.
I believe that the football hooliganism of the 1980s was quashed. Once the lads started going the match on a knee, football violence was gone. I was never really much of a football supporter, because as a teenager I played rugby, and I used to go to watch Southport Rugby Union. Rugby was my game. Not that I was any good at playing it, but I much preferred it to football. And it wasn't really until 98 when I had a new girlfriend who wanted to watch the World Cup that I thought, oh yeah, we'll do that then.
But you had like a massive part to play in the dance decade.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was, like I said, I was the DJ or one of the two DJs that brought acid house to Liverpool. And the promoter was James Barton. And James would only be 17 then, I think.
How old was you then back then? So you must have been...
Well, I was born in 1951, so in 1988, what would I have been, 36, 35? I'll have 1988, I'll have been 37 in the November. So when we started Acid House, I was 36. And when I discovered house music, I was in New York. In 86, I would have been 34. So, what happened just briefly with the State? I graduated from Liverpool University in 1984, and a week later I got a telephone call from a promoter, and she wanted me to DJ in the Cavern.
Yeah.
The replica Cavern had just opened. It was the summer of the Garden Festival, and they wanted a DJ to do 6 lunchtimes, 12 till 3, because at that time, the license finished at 3 and it had to be closed till 5. And there'll be a live band on 1 till 2, and I played music 12 till 1, 2 till 3. And it was a lot of 80s stuff.
Yeah. Bunnymen,
Smiths, Simple Minds, but with some psychedelic stuff, to give it
you've got to know your music, haven't you? And you play to the crowd as well, don't you?
Well, there wasn't. It wasn't a dancing crowd in the Cavern. They went there for the live music, and of course, the replica Cavern is much bigger than the original Cavern was, and there's a big bar area where people tended to go unless the band was on. So, I'm in the Cavern. it's maybe August. And Frank Cookson, who was the DJ from the State, came in and said, look, I'm getting married. I'm going on my honeymoon. I want you to stand in for me for 2 weeks in the State. So that would be September in 84. Then shortly after that, when he came back, he had a row with the owner of the club over how much he got paid for doing a student night. Frank's argument was that he deserved the same number of hours playing the same record, so the money should be the same. And it wasn't going to be shortchanged just because it was a student night.
Yeah.
So he said, basically said to Benny, he said, you can fuck off, I'm off. I think he'd had enough. So we landed the gig. Because I worked with Andy there from the get-go. Because I didn't want to be the only DJ covering the whole night. There's no fun.
Yeah.
You know, if you sharing the night with another DJ, you can go and have a dance. Or I used to go to where the burger bar was near the entrance and chat to girls and so forth.
You had a little bit of an experience in the State. You mentioned, I remember meeting you on the set of Liverpool Narcos, and it was actually in the State that they were filming, and it was a friend of ours, Lee Garrett, who sadly passed away now. You know, he was a good friend of ours. Mentioned you, and he spoke highly of you. And when I finally met you, I was quite excited to sit there and speak to you, because you had some really great stories to tell. And one of them was when you were DJing and someone produced you. I'll let you tell the story.
Right, well, when we switched over from the 80s music, which included bands like In Excess and Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Dead or Alive, Echo and the Bunnymen. Once we became Acid House, then those records were gone. I didn't even have them with me in the DJ box. And one night in 89, I can't tell you exactly when it was, a man came and he wanted an excess, and he was one of a group of people that used to stand at the end of the bar and they wore suits, and they would come into the DJ box to snort cocaine. And when I told them this man I didn't have that record with me, I couldn't help him, he produced a gun. Now, he didn't point the gun at me, but I'm assuming it was loaded. And it wasn't just any gun, it was a Magnum 44. And I told him that, since he was a man with a gun, I was prepared to go back to Southport to get the record. And we'd get a taxi. But he'd have to pay for the taxi and he'd have to come with me. And that completely flummoxed him because he didn't know what to do. Because I was giving him what he wanted, but there was a heavy price to pay, which was a journey to Southport and back. But the coda to this experience, I said hello to him in the all-nighter, the Quadrant Park all-nighter, and he said to his girlfriend, don't speak to him. He wouldn't play my record even when I got my gun out.
That must have been scary, though.
Well, it wasn't. I didn't imagine that he was going to actually point the gun at me and fire it. But
More of a showboater.
But it just to be out in a nightclub and to have a Magnum 44. I'm presuming it had in some kind of shoulder holster. Yeah. I mean, they're big guns, Yeah. So, like I said, that was an experience. It's. I don't know what anybody else would have done.
So he must have been getting on, because In Excess, didn't the lead singer of them die some kind of weird way?
Well, yeah, he's
from Australia, weren't he?
He died in the 80s. I couldn't tell you. I mean, look him up in Wikipedia. Yeah. But I mean, there were 2 or 3 In Excess tracks that the audience liked, and the other thing is this: that we celebrate the State 1980s 2 or 3 times a year. We do a night where when I say we. Yeah. Me and Andy Carroll and Frank Cookson, who was the original DJ. But we don't call it a State reunion. Yeah. For some reason, I don't know what the reason is, the night's called The Killing Moon, which you might know is an Echo and the Bunnymen track. And we did one 27th of November. We had about a couple of hundred people in. Obviously, the crowd are a bit older. Most of that crowd are in their 50s. And we celebrate that music. Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, Echo and the Bunnymen, Smiths. Funnily enough, the stuff that we played in the 80s, including the Beastie Boys or Run DMC, that wouldn't go down now. So some of the music that we played in the 80s, particularly the hip-hop, nobody wants to hear now.
No, not in this current time, no. It's more like the likes of like Kanzi Stanton and Billy Ocean, and that are timeless. You know, you got the Run the DMC and all that. They're all, you know, no one's interested, are they, no more?
Yeah, I mean, but obviously, in the 80s, some of that hip-hop was very popular with our crowd, particularly the Beastie Boys. But I don't play it now. Having said that, the next time we do a Killing Moon, I'm going to play Fight for Your Right to Party by the Beastie Boys, see how it goes down.
Try it, yeah, see how it goes down.
But...
was that called Fight for Your Right? I can't remember that.
I mean, the Beastie Boys were, you know, I went to see them. They were supporting Run DMC. It was 87 in Manchester, and they were really good.
So was you competing with any other clubs back in the day? Like, was it the one in Manchester? What was that called?
What, the Hacienda?
Yeah, the Hacienda.
Well, what's interesting, I went to America in 1986, July. I went with my wife. We were there for 3 weeks in New York. And we were staying with a family out in Flushing Meadows, which is in Queens. Yeah. And I said to my wife, look here, the new music seminar is on while we were in New York, so I'd like your permission to have 3 days off to go to the seminar. And I said, hey, you can come with me if you want. But she said no. So I went to the new music seminar. It was basically daytime, but there were events in the evening, nightclub events. And there were a lot of people there from England, DJs. And there was a DJ Symposium. So it was a room full of DJs and there was a panel. And interestingly, I said to this panel of DJs, one of whom was the Hacienda DJ, what about CD? And they were all adamant that there was no place for CD in DJing. And I said, well, it's early days, but I think you'll find in time the CD will displace the 12-inch single. And I'm of the opinion, and this was prescient, that in the future DJs might well use a computer to mix their music. Now, nobody thought, they must have thought I was crazy. Yeah. But of course now, 50% of DJs
it's virtual DJ now. It's plug and play. You plug it in.
Absolutely. I mean, I use Traktor. Yeah. And funnily enough, obviously I've got a control. I have an Apple MacBook Pro. Yeah. But John Kelly started to use the Pioneer CDJs instead of the controller.
Yeah. See, most clubs don't have got mixers now, and all you do is you plug it in to your laptop, and you've got your virtual DJ online, and then you've got your playlist, and you know your 2 tracks going. You know, one for karaoke, one for.
You see, I mean, as a DJ, I can do other things besides house music because I'm older. I mean, I was there in the 70s when funk and disco, jazz funk. So with the laptop, I can, and a memory stick with the right music on, I can do a Northern Soul night, or I can do a 70s funk and disco night. At a push, I could do a reggae night. Yeah.
Why at a push?
Well, I don't know the reggae that well. Yeah. I'd have to. I've got I've got a load of CDs. So my reggae was all on vinyl, and it was all 45s. Then an African woman who I met on Facebook wanted a memory stick with roots reggae, and that was 2018. And I went out and spent £100 on reggae CDs, ripped them to MP3 and put them on a memory stick and blasted them off to Ghana. She was made up. But I don't really listen to reggae now. So to do a reggae, I'd have to get all the CDs out, work out what was going to play.
So what kind of, like, what's your, like the old school music to you? What does that mean? Like, you know, the dance music? Like, cause for me, it was like Black Box. It was Technotronic. It was Alison, Limerick.
Yeah, well, it was all that stuff, wasn't it? I mean, there was... if we go back to 88, 89, there was obviously Voodoo Ray.
Voodoo, brilliant. Brilliant, yeah.
And then there was... I can't remember all the artists just off my head, but there was some house music that had rapping on as well. We called it hip house. Came out of Chicago, and I liked that. But I can't remember without going through my record box. I can't remember the names of the artists.
Have you still got all these records? Like,
yeah.
Wow.
Now, I mean, over the years I've had some records stolen, obviously. Yeah. And at the moment, I still have them. But of course, when I go out and DJ now, it's in my wallet. I'm going to get the memory stick out. Mm. I mean, I played on the 27th, 2 days ago. I did a 2-hour set, and it was all on the memory stick. And it wasn't. I didn't have to mix everything individually because I created the set out in 20-minute segments. So it's.
So what kinds of music have you got on your stick?
Well, all that's on the stick is basically Quadrant Park music.
Wow.
Because it was a Quadrant Park reunion.
So you'd have like the likes of like Quadrant Park, Scouse House?
No, I never played any Scouse House.
No.
I've never owned any. Never liked it.
No.
So what we're looking at is Italian stuff like JJ Tribute, Asher, and without it's so hard to remember without the records to give me. I actually, when I do that set, they're all written down in a book, so I know where I'm up to. Italian house was very popular in Quadrant Park. Things like I'm All Right by Catherine E. And like I said, JJ Tribute, Asher. Now, what's interesting is, I told you before, I was a lecturer at the Hubert College.
Yeah.
And my subject was electronics. And I taught on the BTEC National Diploma. Excuse me. Now, my students had taken over the Students' Union and they wanted to put a dance on. And they wanted to have it in the state at Christmas in 1989. So I said, it's not going to happen. Because I'm fairly confident that the police will take away the license.
Yeah. And
probably the owner will voluntarily close rather than go to court and lose the license. You know, it looks better from the point of view of the authorities if he agrees to close. And then he hasn't lost his license. So I said to them, excuse me, we'll do it at Quadrant Park. I said, it's nearby, it's in Bootle. I know who the owner is, although I didn't know him personally. I'll ring him up and make an appointment, and we'll go down. I'll introduce myself, and then I'll push you lads forward. And it's your night. You negotiate the deal. Yeah. But I said, what you need to do is advertise it in the Echo. Mike Knowler from the State. House music in 1980s. We got nearly 1,300 people in on a Thursday.
Wow.
And that was the end of December. It's like the 20th of December, something like that, in 1989. And at the end of the night, the manager, a man called Dave Call, said to me, would I be interested in doing a house night on a Thursday? So I said, yeah. He said, well, come in after Christmas. Come in between Christmas and New Year, and we'll talk. So I went and I got there, and there was nobody in. There was about 300 people in a venue that holds over 2,000. The Quadrant Park was on its arse, basically. And what was it? Nicky D, I think, was the DJ. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No.
He was famous for being on Blind Date.
Yeah.
Liverpool lad. He probably a bit older than you. I can't be exactly certain. But the music that he was playing owed a lot to the State 1980s. It wasn't as Billy Ocean and that sort of 70s 80s soul disco. It wasn't that mostly. It was New Order and Simple Talking Heads, which really surprised me.
Talking Heads, yeah, wow.
So I arranged that we do the night. negotiated a fee, which was more than I was getting at the State, because I wasn't paid properly at the State. And it was the 11th of January, 1990. And I told the owner and the manager to advertise it in the Echo, rave at the Quadrant Park. Mike Knowler from the State Ballroom. And we got 1,300 people in on the first night.
Brilliant.
So what was interesting, it wasn't long before I realised that there were young kids in there selling drugs. Because I go to the loo and they said, do you want to buy this or that? And I went to the owner and I said, look, you've got a problem. Because young kids are openly selling drugs in here. And if you don't do something about it, the police will close you down. So they said, well, what should we do? I said, write to the police. Tell them that you've been informed by your DJ that there's a problem and ask them to come down and talk to you about it. So they came down and there was a raid. It was on a Thursday night.
Yeah.
And the police came in mob-handed. They brought a load of drugs with them to make sure that they found something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they brought in cocaine and heroin, but nobody was using it.
Why would anyone have heroin in a nightclub?
I know. So anyway, funnily enough, it was on raid. It was on the BBC News, this raid. And when I got into work at the Hubert College, my boss, Ron Baxendale, said, I thought you'd be in custody now. Your club was... Yeah. I said, well, actually, Ron, as it happens, I don't do drugs, which it wasn't entirely true. But I certainly didn't... I didn't do drugs when I was in the quad, because I couldn't DJ. When I'm on a tablet, my head goes west, and there's no chance of me DJing.
That's the problem with DJs in this day and age, and back in the day when they were using a lot. Lee Butler, as is Siemens, he openly speaks about how he drank a lot and took a lot of drugs at the time, mainly cocaine. So that must have had an impact on how you played, or how you.
Well, I mean, speed and cocaine I can DJ on.
Yeah.
Because basically they're just a central nervous system stimulant. But ecstasy, it takes away your ability to think logically. And playing a DJ set is a bit like playing chess. You've got to be a few moves ahead. You don't want to know, when this record gets...
I know about this, yeah.
So now I did try and DJ on a tablet a couple of times. What I did, I put all the records in the order I wanted to play them.
Yeah. And
I had John Kelly there, so if anything went wrong, he could just... But I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't... Ecstasy was something to do on a night out at the Hacienda. So, I mean, just going back to the Hacienda, obviously, the Hacienda was to Manchester what the State was to Liverpool.
Yeah. But
they started a bit sooner. The Hacienda... they started at the end of 87 playing Acid House. And actually, around about Easter time in 1988, there was a feature in the Sunday Times magazine about the Hacienda and house music. And the owner of the State, Bernard Start, he said to me, what about house music? And then we had a conversation, which was basically, we've got house music. Andy and I are keen on house music, but... when we play it, it doesn't go down very well. It's not what our current crowd want. But, but we never thought. I've never had much of a business brain. It never occurred to me to say to Bernie, we'll put an acid night on a Monday and see how we go.
Yeah.
That's, because we could have started that, in the early summer of 88.
But they made a killing.
But it just never occurred to me. And of course, because I was a college lecturer, I really only wanted to DJ on a Friday and Saturday. Although I have done DJing on weeknights, but to go and teach a class when you've been up all night, it's not a lot of fun. Funnily enough, on a Monday, Bernie Start experimented with a gay night. Now I can't tell you what year it was, but I think it was 87, and it was on a Monday. And he said to me, I need you to come in. They've got their own DJs, but I want you to be responsible for switching the equipment on and making sure that they don't damage the equipment. And you can do the lasers. And I didn't run, I don't know how many nights, so it didn't last for long. But the thing that surprised me was how close their music was to what we were playing. They played a few tracks which were more obviously gay, what used to be called high energy or Boys Town. But mostly they were playing Talking Heads, Simple Minds, U2, pretty much what we played, the Smiths. And on a Tuesday, I used to have a late start that year in the college, so it wasn't too bad. But now I find I can function with just a couple of hours sleep, or even not miss a night's sleep out.
Yeah.
But when I was younger...
Because you're 70 now, aren't you? We were talking about that
I was 70
before.
on the 20th of November.
You've got a son the same age as me, well, older.
Well, yeah, my son's 49. He'll be 50 on the 5th of February. Wow. He's alright. He's not as good looking as me, but for me, I mean...
Same birthday as me sister, as my brother. Same date.
I've got a new iPhone. It has the Face ID. It's something that I find deeply peculiar. So, just going back to the Hacienda, I first went to the Hacienda in '87, and that was before house music, you know, and they had a lot of live acts on, and the DJ would play a lot of funk and jazz funk, which was different from what we were doing in the States. And it was a great club, but it was, you know, it was half empty. We'd go on a Wednesday, because we couldn't go Thursday, Friday, Saturday, because we were DJing in the States. And when I was in New York and I was at the New Music Seminar and they were talking about the Hacienda and it was a big deal, I actually said, but nobody goes. And I think they were a bit flabbergasted. But I said, I've been, you know, to the Hacienda. It's not busy, which it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't until house music came along that...
You had the likes, I think, going back as well, you had the likes of Mr. Smith's later on, didn't you? That was that replicated other nightclubs in Liverpool.
Oh, well, when we started to do the Quadrant Park reunions in 2006, there's a lad called Ian Kenyon. It was his idea. And he built a website, Quadrant Park. And he created compilation CDs, like 20 tracks. He basically just... Nowadays it's called a vinyl rip. It's where you record the 12-inch record and create a digital file. And he basically created the website to promote the Quadrant Park reunion events and sell these CDs. And one of the events, and I can't remember what month it was at Mr. Smith's in Warrington. And I'd never been to Warrington or to Mr. And it was, you know, it was good. And last year I was talking to a girl on Facebook Messenger, Juliana name is. She's about my son's age. And she said, was there a night at Mr. Smith's or did I imagine it? I said, no, it happened. Yeah, but the first Quadrant Park reunion was at I forget what the club was called, in Croxteth. And the club was very similar to the Quad, the same architect had designed it.
Croxteth, yeah. Can't even imagine what that...
And we had over 2,000 people in. And it was March 2006. And I remember we came out and it was snowing. But I mean, there were so many people in there they weren't expecting. They drank the bar dry. But I just can't remember what the venue was called. You know, we basically fell out with this Ian Kenyon. What he wanted to do was to put the quad reunions on the back burner and do something else. He called it Back to the Old Pool. And we said, no. We're the Quadrant Park DJs. And if you don't want to do the Quadrant Park, we'll do them ourselves. Yeah. We don't need you. And he was really offended, but it was my idea. I said, yeah, but we were the DJs. Anybody can have an idea. But, you know...
Put it into action, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to have a Quadrant Park reunion, you've got to have the Quadrant Park DJs on. Yeah. So, I mean, that was 2006. It had never occurred to me, again, to create a Quadrant Park reunion But, you know, it was Ian Kenyon co-promoted the events with John Kelly. And I think we did 4 or 5 at this venue in Liverpool. And 1 in Mr. Smith's and 1 on the ferry on the Mersey.
Brilliant. It's just incredible having that kind of experience.
Now, one of my difficulties as a college lecturer, I didn't want to be in the Quadrant Park, you know, clearly intoxicated on drugs, because my students, or many of them, would be there. So I used to go to the Hacienda on a Wednesday when Mike Pickering and John De Silva were DJing, if I wanted to take a tablet.
So did you have what was your experience with drugs like? What was that?
Well, because of my age, I first did drugs as a teenager, and the drug that I used was amphetamine. And in those days, there were slimming pills that, you know, what were called Dexies and Blueies and Black Bombers and Green and Clears. And these would basically be stolen from chemist shops. And amphetamine was prescribed for slimming because it's an appetite suppressant. Yeah. And also for an antidepressant, you know, mixed with phenobarbital. So my first experience of drugs was basically that. And I went to a club called the Twisted Wheel, which is in Manchester. I was 17, I got a handful of pills in my pocket. And I didn't honestly think I'd get in. Because when I was 17, I looked about 12. Yeah. And I thought, they're never going to let me in. Anyway, that paid me money, I was in. Went to the toilet, took my drugs, changed out of my suit into you know, jeans and a denim shirt. Put my suit in my carrier bag, put it into the cloakroom. That scene at the Twisted Wheel Club, which was basically up-tempo soul music, became Northern Soul later on in the 70s. Yeah. But amphetamine was because it was an all-night event. So you can't go to an all-night event, dance all night if you've not had something to keep you going. No,
I remember, you know, my journey back in the 80s, and the ecstasy kept us. It was just like, you know, you go into these warehouses and down the South End into the garage and the supermarket and all these after parties, and you know, they were there till 5, 6 in the morning.
Yeah, see, I mean, the other thing, I mean, it's interesting. When I was about 17 or 18, I smoked pot for the first time. Yeah. And I basically threw a whitey. And I think one of the reasons was because what I was smoking was strong and my body hadn't really experienced pot. And it wasn't good. You know, I was hallucinating and I threw a whitey. And I was thinking, this can't be right. You know, I was anxious and a bit paranoid, felt dreadful. You know, drugs are supposed to be good, but the bottom line is cannabis has never really agreed with me. No. And for that reason, you know, if somebody builds a joint and they pass it to me, I'll have a couple of tokes, but often I won't inhale it. Cannabis was never, you know, a drug that agreed with my body. But I like speed, and I like to, you know, the experience of dancing all night. Yeah. And back in the day, if you take the right amount of speed, the top of your head used to tingle, and it's not as good as ecstasy, but it's, you know, it's basically the dancing. It gets your blood pressure up, and if you've had the right amount of amphetamine, it's quite a buzz. But of course, the real problem is that the next day, when you feel like shit, and that actually can go on till the middle of the week. If you take a lot of amphetamine, it could be Wednesday before you feel normal, and then before you know it, it's Saturday. You're
back at it again. So what was life like growing up as a kid? Where was it? Was you born in Southport?
I was born in Southport. I grew up in Southport. My dad was an electrician. Yeah. So we were basically blue collar working class. But he would work overtime every weekend and in the evening. So we had more money than the average electrician's family would have, because my dad was prepared to work the overtime. So, you know, we had lived in a nice house. It was rented from my Auntie Mabel. I went to the grammar school. I was interested in music from age 12 and, you know, buying records. I also had an interest in what's called amateur radio or ham radio. And I got a transmitting license when I was 16. I started to go to youth clubs when I was about 13 or 14. And back then there were no DJs, but there'd be a record player and people would bring the records and put them on. And I was into sort of soul music by the age of 14. So the music that I liked wasn't necessarily in the pop charts. But pretty quick, because of pirate radio, I realised I wanted to be a DJ. So by the time I was 16, 17, I had a setup at home with 2 record players and a mixer. So when I'm playing my 45s, I could go from one to the other. There was no mixing in those days, but it was just, you know, it meant that the music was continuous. There wasn't a gap where you had to take the record off and put the next record on. It was when I was 17, I was in a club called the Kingsway Casino, which was in Southport. And the top floor, it was 3 floors. The gambling casino bit was on the middle floor. The bottom bit was a cabaret and a restaurant. And back then, which was 69, groups were the main thing. And as the DJ basically just played before the group and after the group and when the group were having a break. And the DJ they got on when I went was called Bob Stewart. And Bob Stewart had been a Radio Caroline DJ. And he spoke with an American accent, but he was from Crosby.
G'day.
And I think he realised that,
It was Australian, wasn't it?
you know, a Liverpool accent wouldn't be ideal, but he knew how to do what's called a, you know,
American accent.
a North Atlantic, you know, sort of a cross between.
Yeah.
And he was playing that music from the Twisted Wheel. Those were the records he was playing, what I called rare soul. And I just said to him, you know, I fancy doing this as a job. How do I go about it? He says, well, look, I'm leaving shortly to go to Radio Luxembourg. Tell me your name and I'll put your name in the hat. And, you know, I can't give you the job, but I can recommend you. Yeah. And he did. So I got this job at the Kingsway Casino. I got a bit of a record collection together. But I was only 17. I wasn't 18 for another couple of months. And the man who was in charge of the floor manager wasn't for paying me. So he did say, you know, you can be the DJ, but I'm not paying you. You've got to prove yourself first. And of course, I never did get paid. And obviously, there was an allocation for a DJ that he was just keeping.
Yeah. That was it. So you weren't getting paid, so.
So what went wrong is the other DJ, because we worked as a pair, me and a guy called Phil. And Phil got it up in his head to shave his head. Well, nowadays, loads of people shave their head. But in 1969, it didn't go down well.
No.
And we turned up, and the bouncer says, you can't come in. Now, what I should have said, I said, okay, I'll come in on my own, because I hadn't shaved my head. And I said to Phil, I'll carry on DJing until your hair grows back. Yeah. But I just walked away, and that was it. But it was quite a prestigious gig. You know, that's what got me started. Now, you asked me what it was like growing up. The real problem for me growing up was because my dad was never at home, I didn't have much of a relationship with him because I never saw him. But my dad hated what I will call pop music, whether it's soul or funk or the Rolling Stones. My dad hated that. Yeah. And there was an issue because what I'd done, I'd put the system together. I'd got a fairly big amplifier, 25 watts a channel, which was quite a lot in 1968. And 2 big boxes with 12-inch speakers in that had come from a bingo hall. So although it wasn't exactly high fidelity, it was loud. Yeah. And so I basically, at age 16, realised I needed to leave home. So I went to college in Fleetwood to train to be a radio officer, ship's radio officer.
Yeah.
Now, I could have gone to, what's that college in South Liverpool called? Riverside.
Riverside,
yeah. They did the course there. I could have got the train. But I needed to leave home. I needed to get out of the house. I was fed up of my dad.
Mm.
So when I got to Fleetwood, because I was only 16, I had to live in digs. In other words, you know, full board. And the landlady's daughter was a bit older than me, and she'd been at the Twisted Wheel. So she had a little collection of those records that I liked. And I got my own collection, but there wasn't a lot of overlap. We had different stuff. And I'd, you know, sit in the front room with her and we'd play these records and, you know, talk to me about going to the wheel. She didn't go to the all-nighters. She used to go to the Sunday afternoon sessions, which was, you know, more popular with people who were under 18. Her name was Connie. And eventually, about a year later, she said, "Do you want to buy my records?" And she realised she'd grown out of them. Mm. So I bought her records, and that bolstered my own collection. But, you know, in the late 60s, Fleetwood was pretty backward, you know.
Still is. No.
I hated it. And also, the landlady wasn't as good a cook as my mum.
Yeah. You missed out on your own cooking as well.
Yeah, but it did get me out of the house. But because I started DJing while I was at Fleetwood Nautical College, I quickly realised that the last thing I wanted to do was be stuck on a ship, sending and receiving Morse code. So I never went to sea, although I passed my exams. And of course that caused a rift with my dad. So he said, "You either go to sea or you leave home." I said, "Well, I'm off."
That was it.
And that was it. I was gone.
And then your journey into DJing began.
And my journey as a DJ began. But before I became a full-time DJ, I got my girlfriend pregnant. Mm. So in October 1971, I got married. And in February of 1970...
You're only 20, 51, 60... So, yeah, 20 years old.
Yeah, my son was born. And at the time, fathers were just starting to get to be present when the baby was born. But it wasn't expected. You had to ask. Now, if a dad isn't there, they want to know why. So I was excuse me, I was there when my son was born. And then in the beginning, my wife and I were living in a one-room studio, or really a bedsit. And the landlord had made it clear, you know, you can't continue to live here if you've got a baby, so don't worry about it. My mum has sorted me a flat out, but I can't move in till January. And it was actually a maisonette, 3 bedrooms over a shop. And I lived there from January 1972 until July 86. It's a big flat. It was as big as a 3-bedroom semi-detached. Yeah. But it was over a shop. The way it worked, my Auntie Mabel, who was 60 at the time, had just got married. And she moved in with her new husband. And they'd been friends for a while, but he was married. And that prevented them getting married. His wife was disabled. And she passed away, and then Mabel got married. But Mabel was able to give us furniture from her house to furnish our flat.
So that's how you started?
So it just worked out right.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
But so the other thing is, my dad was born in Waterloo, and my mum was from Bootle. So growing up, we used to spend weekends in Crosby with my dad's family, his Auntie Mabel and his sister, Auntie Pat, and their kids. So I always had a contact with Liverpool. A lot of Liverpool people will say, "Yeah, but Crosby isn't Liverpool, is it?" But it is to me. You know, once you get to Thornton, you're in Liverpool, in my opinion. So I started to go out in Liverpool as a teenager, but not to clubs. But I go to Frank Hess's, I bought a guitar, or I go to Nems or wherever it was to buy records.
Curly music now.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So then 1972, there was a big mobile disco in Southport called Radio Doom Good Guys. And there were two teachers who'd been to Edgehill College. And one of them had got married and his wife wanted him to stop being a DJ. So the other one said to me, do you fancy taking over from Jeff and run Radio Doom with me? So that's what I did. From January 72 until April 78, I ran the Radio Doom Disco.
Brilliant.
And we did colleges, universities, youth clubs. So, back in the early to mid 70s, youth clubs were very popular.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And, we could put a gig on at Netherton Youth Club and get a couple of hundred kids in. And generally the girls wanted Tamla Motown and soul. And generally the lads wanted glam rock. T-Rex, David Bowie, Gary Glitter, The Sweet. And I was doing that 13 nights out of 14.
Brilliant. So you've had a life full of music, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, for those years, I was a professional DJ. But there wasn't a lot of money in it, though, in those days. I couldn't tell you what that money would be worth now, but we would charge £25 to £30 for a gig. And we'd turn up in a transit van with amplifiers and speakers and light show and everything. Yeah. But there wasn't, I don't know how much 25 quid would translate to today. But I wasn't rich as a professional DJ.
It's sad, like, isn't it? Because some people have made millions from it, haven't they?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you didn't, which is...
I mean, I didn't get to make a lot of money as a DJ until Acid House came.
Yeah.
It was really 1990 when I went to the Quadrant Park. I knew what I was worth, and I asked for a realistic amount of money.
Yeah, and you got it.
And I got it.
But they're bringing all them punters in into them clubs, they're coming to you, aren't they, to listen to what you're playing.
Well, I mean, as I said to you earlier in the discussion, when I went into the Quad after Christmas in '89, the place was virtually empty. And the Quad had its day. In the 80s, the Hitman and Her had been to the Quad, and they were playing that 80s soul funk groove, very commercial.
Yeah, because that was on the telly, wasn't it? Saturday night. That.
Yeah, Saturday night. I used to quite like it.
The Wiggy and that, weren't it?
Yeah.
The wig.
What's his name? I can't think of his name now.
Peter Waterman.
Peter Waterman. He actually was a record producer, and he'd been a Northern Soul DJ, but he PWL was.
Who did he have with him? That girl as well, Pete Waterman and
what was it? Michaela, was it? Michaela Stratton.
Yeah.
And I quite liked the Hitman and Her. And I'd finished work normally because, and it'd be on the telly. Now, I mean, just a point that's worth mentioning is until I don't know what year it was. Let's say the mid '90s, or maybe a bit later. Nightclubs closed at 2. And that used to frustrate the life out of me. It just seemed so unfair. When I knew that if I, for example, I went to Copenhagen with my wife to stay with a friend there, and we went out to a disco, it was until 6 in the morning.
Yeah, there's no messing about, is there?
And I just felt it was really unfair that our kids in England were expected to go home at 2 a.m. Now, Christmas night, I did a gig at a venue that's called 24 Kitchen Street. And it was at Quadrant Park Music. But it was on till 4 a.m. And the audience were kids, really, under 25 mostly. But they all stayed till 4 a.m. And I looked at them and I just thought, you don't know you're born. We put this night on for you. you can dance to the music your granddad played.
It's true, isn't it? It's timeless though, isn't it?
I know. And they were all there till 4. Now, Monday, we did a Quadrant Park reunion. That was only on till 3.
Right.
We found with our crowd, they start to drift off at 2. So there's no point in playing till 4 if there's nobody there.
Yeah, no.
So just going back to my career, I left Radio Doom in 1978 when I was headhunted by a community media organisation called the Merseyside Visual Communications Unit. And what they wanted me to do was to build a recording studio, 4-track studio, and bring local bands in, to make records or make recordings. And they had the physical studio already set up, 2 rooms and a glass thing between the 2 rooms, and they had microphones, but they didn't have everything.
Yeah.
So I said, well, we need a 4-track tape recorder, we need a couple of 2-track Revoxes, and we need some, decent studio monitors. And I built a studio there. And then at the time, I was also going to college one day a week in Preston. I did my high national certificate in electrical engineering and electronics. So I used to take a day off in the week and work at the weekend. So I'd have 2 days off, say Tuesday and Wednesday, to go to college. But I wheedled my way in to be the DJ at Preston Polytechnic. So over the 3 years that I was studying for my high national certificate, I was also the college DJ. So I went from, Radio Doom to... So I was in the same place 3 times a week.
Brilliant.
No, 2 times a week, really, Friday and Saturday.
So what is it that you do with yourself these days then, Mike? Because I'm listening and like wow, your career's just been constantly like in and out of clubs and doing gigs.
When I left the teaching profession in 1996, and the reason was because they were bringing in a new contract of employment that took away 5 weeks of the long summer holiday. And there was no extra money involved. And also, they wanted exclusivity.
Yeah.
So if I was working at the Uberg College, I couldn't be a DJ.
Yeah.
Unless they gave me permission, which they probably wouldn't. Excuse me. So I made a decision to leave teaching. And I had a bit of a rough ride. But eventually I ended up working for the Inland Revenue in 1999. So there was a 3-year period when I was doing a bit of this and a bit of that. Van driving, office furniture, bit of block paving. But I was determined not to become unemployed.
Yeah.
And I worked for the Revenue from August 99 until November 2011. When I was 60. And I made a decision at age 60 that although my pension wasn't going to be a lot of money, I was going to retire because I'd had enough. I'd worked in the office for 12 years. I wasn't involved with tax. I was doing tax credits. It started off Working Families Tax Credit in 99. And then in 2003, it became National Tax Credits or New Tax Credits. And I did that for 12 years. But it meant that when I was 60, I got 12 years of teacher's pension. And when I was 60, I got 12 years of 12 years of civil service pension, plus 11 years of teacher's pension.
Okay.
Which was like $8,000, which is not a lot of money. But I made a decision because I had an inheritance. So I had some capital, and I thought, no, I want to retire. So I'd basically been retired for 10 years.
Yeah.
But 2012, I was in India for 6 months, and when I came home, my son, he does block paving, he was doing Stephen Gerrard's house. So I went there and we did Stephen Gerrard's patio and driveway. It was basically, labouring. It wasn't hard. because we had to take up what was already down. And my son didn't want to throw it away, he wanted to sell it on. So we created meter cubes of these little granite pieces. And then the next year, I worked for my son for 5 months for the whole of the summer, labouring. But, you know, I got to the end of September and I said to my son, I'm done for.
It's done for now.
You know, there's nothing left.
Not left. But you know what, right? It's just been really great speaking to you. But we're coming to the end now. So what I always say at the end of a podcast, you know, is there any words of wisdom? What would you say to a young Mike Knowler coming through the doors of life? What would you tell him? What pearls of wisdom would you have to offer?
The first thing I'd say to any would-be DJ, don't do it for nothing. I've done it for nothing, and it doesn't get you anywhere. Know what you're worth. There isn't really much else I could offer.
That's it. Brilliant.
See, the world of a DJ now is so different. All the latest music is a download from a website, and you pay 99p for a mix.
Yeah.
Where in my day, everything was on 12-inch singles, and they were expensive. And say back in 1989, there was no shop in Liverpool that sold that music. So I had to go to Manchester on the train and go to Eastern Bloc Records. And to have the right records, it was expensive. You know, the world of the DJ today is very different. But the main advice I give, don't make the mistake of doing it for nothing.
That's it. Don't make the mistake of doing it for nothing. And with that, Mike, thank you. Thanks for coming along.